Before we begin the service, I'm just going to request that everyone silence all type of electronic devices as we pay proper kavod, proper respect to an incredible woman, Betty Fishman. My name is Rabbi Binyamin Blau. I have the honor of being the rabbi of Gimnot Synagogue, the synagogue where she was a member, even preceding that, back to Marmisha Jewish Center for so many years. It was an incredible pillar of our synagogue. I'm going to start off by saying a parak of Tehillim, a chapter of Psalms. I'm going to start off with parak of Gimel, Psalm 23. Mizmor le David, Adonai roi lo echsar, binos tesher yabitzeni amenuchos yinaleini, nafshi yeshovev yankeni magle tzedek leman shemo, gam ki elech begeit zamaves, lo irarak yato imadi, shivtach mishantecha hema yenachamuni, tarok lefanai shochan neget zoriroi, Tishanda Bashem and Roshi Kosi Rivoya, Akto Vachesed Yudafuni Koyame Chayai, Vishav Deves Adonai Liorech Yamim. A song of David, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not lack. God caused me to lie down in lush pastures. God leads me beside tranquil waters. God restores my soul and guides me in righteous paths for God's name's sake. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your scepter and staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in full view of my adversaries. You have anointed my head with oil. My cup overflows. May only goodness and kindness pursue me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord for length of days. As I noted, we gather here today to pay our respects to Brian Abbas Yisrael, Betty Fishman, loving mother, Bobby, great-grandmother, sister, aunt, and an extraordinary community member, and very sadly, one of the last of our survivors in our kehillah, in our community. The way we're going to proceed this morning is as follows. I'm going to call up two members, two of her grandchildren, beloved grandchildren, Jonathan and Michael. They're both going to deliver remarks, and then I'll add concluding tribute to a legendary woman. I'll first call up Jonathan.
My grandmother Betty was born on March 20th, 1922, in Ramek, a tiny shtetl in the Marmarsh region, which is a farming community of both Jews and Gentiles. Her father passed away when she was just 7 years old, at which point her mother skillfully continued running the family farm. Her mother maintained the respect her father earned from everyone in the community, no matter who they were, earning adoration from my grandmother and her 11 siblings. Life was hard for everybody in Ramek, but my grandma always enjoyed the company of friends and relatives in the area. It was a pretty happy childhood, filled with hard work, but surrounded by love and water from the well on the family property. Even into her old age, she always reminded us that in all of Ramek, there were only 3 wells. One was ours, and the other was the mayor's. As she entered her teens, the situation in Europe began impacting her family. Everything changed in 1940 when Romania ceded Maramarsh back to Hungary. The family faced increased pressure and harassment that resulted in forced relocation to a ghetto in 1943. It was not until May of 1944 that my grandmother, her younger sister, Henya, along with their mother and other relatives, stepped onto a cattle car bound for a dreadful destination. When they arrived at Auschwitz, Tante Henya and my grandma were separated from their mother, who they loved so much. Vaiga's last words to them were, "You two stay together and write me a letter." The letter, of course, didn't come, but my grandmother was adamant about watching over her younger sister, who named her first daughter after their mother. Tante Henya and my grandmother mostly paved airfields during the 7 months they spent between 2 camps. My grandmother never spoke much about her experience in the Holocaust, but she told me one story about being so cold that they used a concrete bag to wear it as a coat. As the Russians closed in on Stutthof, the Germans began moving anyone who could walk onto a death march through the harsh winter. The 2 sisters decided to hide in the snow at one point and were eventually found by a young German soldier. They expected to be shot, but the soldier brought them to a camp before his commanding officer. True to watching over her sister, my grandma spoke with the German officer. He gave them food and shelter, but he insisted, when morning comes, I'm going to change clothes and I'm going to become one of you. They wake up the next morning, it's an empty house, and the Russians closed in. After surviving everything that she did, my grandma, along with her surviving siblings, made their way back home to Remik. Thankfully, a gracious neighbor had looked after their home. My grandfather, Michael Fishman, and my grandma were acquainted prior to the war. Their experiences during the Holocaust brought them back together, and they quickly married in 1945. After the war, my grandmother's surviving siblings settled in Canada by way of Israel. My grandparents spent time in a displaced persons camp before making their way to Cleveland in 1949. Soon after, she became mom when my Aunt Cheryl was born in 1950, and again in 1956 when my dad Mark was born. The Fishman home was always filled with fellow Marmarshers. Whether they were friends or relatives, nobody really knew or cared. The Fishman kids were spoiled with food, traditional Jewish cooking at its finest. Today, my grandmother is reunited with Zaidi Mike, who preceded her in death in 1978. My mom, Amy, and my Uncle Mark loved her like their own mother. Julie was the first grandchild and came up with the Bobby nickname when she was just a baby. Michael soon followed, and I brought up the rear about 10 years later. The three of us jokingly argue about who was Bobby's favorite. But the truth is, by Bobby, none of us could do anything wrong. Not even my childhood dog, who only came over for the cheese sandwiches or the custom omelet, depending on which Thursday it was. Nothing brought Bobby more joy than cooking for us and seeing us happy. In my case, she always asked if I had friends, because she would say, having friends is very important. In her incredible 102 years, Bobby was the most loving grandmother to Julie, Michael, and I. In more recent years, she was blessed as great-grandma Bobby to Madeline, Callie, Avery, and Robert. Bobby touched and probably filled the stomach of everyone gathered here today. I will always remember her for her joy of life, her incredible strength of character, and her adorable laugh. May Bobby's memory be a blessing.
Michael?
My grandmother was the sun, and the rest of the members of my family were merely planets orbiting her. She was at the center of everything. Her incredible warmth comforted us. Her brilliant light guided us. Her smiling, happy presence let us know that everything in the world made sense, and we were all exactly where we were supposed to be, playing the very role we were meant to play. For as long as I can remember, my grandma and I shared a unique bond. As anyone in my family old enough to remember will attest, I was a notoriously difficult child, just horrible. She was the one person I'd always behave for, a true Michael whisperer. I was constantly being sent home from school, and since my mom worked, I often found myself in her care. Looking back, I realized how incredibly impactful that time we spent together was during that period. Humor was always at the heart of our relationship. It was the thread that tied us together. She never grew tired of me badgering her with ridiculous questions. Which grandchild is your favorite? Who do you love more, Mom or Uncle Mark? Who's your favorite member of Zaidi Murray's family? Who'd win in a fight, Tante Henya or Tante Frida? She loved my silly impersonations. Her favorite one was my Uncle Libby. Brana, where is Cheryl mit the Kinder? We could take one look at one another and make each other laugh. It was like we had our own little secret language that nobody else could hear. It was just ours. It was that way at the very beginning, and it was that way until the very end. It never wavered even once along the way. The reality of no longer having that in my constant is just so unthinkable to me. Cooking was my grandma's love language, and Baruch Hashem, she was the greatest. Matzo ball soup, Sibila, gefilte fish, her legendary homemade pickles, potato chult, bean chult, kugel, kindle, kiggle, chicken and dumplings, noodles and cabbage, stuffed veal, stuffed chicken, stuffing. We were all stuffed. Just perpetually stuffed, unapologetic, unadulterated gluttony, and sorry, but I'm not sorry. Nobody on the planet could pick a piece of fruit quite like her. For some reason, pineapples, plums, pears, peaches, and grapes were just always so much better at her house. And that raspberry bush in the backyard on a hot summer day, until you had the rotchka, my uncle would say. Our extended family in Canada was a source of endless pride and joy for her. She shared an incredible bond with her sisters Henya and Frida, as well as her brother Itzik. She never missed a simcha and loved scooping us on stories about so-and-so's success or his or her love life. She kept close tabs on everyone and cherished every phone call. Vera, Bert, Chaim, Jill, and family, you guys brought so much happiness into her life. She had so much fun at your seemingly never-ending string of simchas and gatherings. She truly loved all of you until her dying day. Ann Winters, Lamika Armstrong, Ruth Hall. I speak for my entire family when I say you are our guardian angels. The level of care you guys provided for her was nothing less than remarkable. You are heroes in the truest sense of the word. All three of you will forever hold a special place in both our family and as well as our hearts. May you and yours all be inscribed in the book of life. To the Holocaust program at Jewish Family Services, we are eternally grateful for the huge impact you had on my grandma's care. You truly are a credit to our people. I can't imagine a more impactful or deserving organization. It is said we are mirrors of the people that raised us. Mom and Uncle Mark, each of you reflected the very best of Bobby in the care you gave her. Your dedication was extraordinary, full of love, patience, and deep understanding of not just what she needed, but what she wanted. You embodied her strength and resilience, stepping up in ways that can only come from a lifetime of learning by example. You honored her legacy by showing her the same selfless love and devotion she had always shown to all of us. May the timeless effort both of you put forth keep her living at home comfortably by herself for all these years serve as a guidepost to the future generations of our family. Mom, cooking 3 meals a day, chauffeuring her to countless doctor's appointments and whatnot, managing her schedule, and we're just scraping the surface, because it's just the surface, because there's so much other stuff. Uncle Mark, you would be so sick from your treatments, and you would crawl and scratch to get there so you could sit there all day on Saturdays and Sundays to be with her. It was just so inspiring to watch, and, you know, like I said, we're mirrors of the people that raised us. Special thanks to Rabbi Blau. Rabbi Blau, my grandma was a very frustrating person to talk to on the phone. She never heard that great, and towards the end, she did not hear at all. And you still called her every week, and it was such an honor to her. And we just, you know, she loved you and thought so highly of you, and, you know, our family could not be more appreciative. Bobby, you were the classiest, most elegant person I've ever known. I've carried a huge part of you in my heart anywhere I've ever been, and I always will. I love you so much, and thank you.
I want to thank both the two of you for those incredible, powerful words. When we met together with the family yesterday, I said, it's so much more meaningful when the family speaks, words from the heart. And in this sense, the rabbi, I'll only try to add a little bit more, flesh out some of the points you already made. There'll be a little bit of overlap, but we're all capturing her essence. It was really my privilege. You mentioned my calling her on Fridays. I would call her, and they'd say, I could hear the aide saying, it's the rabbi on the phone. And she referred to me as the young rabbi, which was very nice. That's that young rabbi. And we'd have the same conversation each time. She would say, to what do I owe this honor? There was an unbelievable graciousness to who she was. And I would say, no, it's my honor to call you. And again, we go through it with a similar refrain. But she was a great, great lady. It was mentioned the closeness she had with her family, how close she was to that family in Toronto. One note that you shared with me, the family shared with me that wasn't mentioned, just to give you an illustration of how close they were, when Betty had her 100th birthday party, 60 relatives came from Toronto. That's very impressive. There's an unbelievable closeness, an unbelievable bond. And when was reference to the fact that after the war, she and her husband came to Cleveland. Her sisters initially went to Israel before settling in Canada. The family told me they were very poor in Israel. In fact, part of the reason they didn't go to Israel, she and Mike, was because there was no meat there. Needed meat. And they sent food. She sent food to her sisters. She actually sent them spam, not realizing it wasn't kosher. But she sent them food to make sure they had food to eat because they were in such a difficult, precarious situation. We tend to forget how difficult life was when the people came, when the survivors came, how challenging it was. When she and her husband came to Cleveland and they opened up a kosher poultry shop in Coventry, and again, kosher poultry meant live chicken. That was not easy work. It was incredibly challenging. In fact, the children still remember that powerful smell from being there, from the store. And in fact, Sona recounted what it was like coming over and seeing a bowl of chicken feet being made for soup. He liked the soup. It was very good. But at that time, I think they were still dating, and there was a nervousness. This may call it all off, seeing the chicken feet. But it wound up to be fine. Her house was a very happy one. She had a great sense of humor, one that I'm sure everyone here who had gathered together recalls. And she had a tremendous close relationships, as was noted, with the fellow members of the Marmorish community. As I mentioned earlier, she was a very dedicated member of Green Road Synagogue. She was the president of the sisterhood. And like many, many of the other, and I see some of the people here who are gathered, whose parents did this with them, did with her, the women used to make thousands of latkes, thousands, for the various events. Latkes and stuffed cabbage, the cholbshas, that were the Green Road Synagogue, traditional Michael, and she made them with great fanfare and great love. She was so proud when what was now our last building, but then the building was built in the 1970s. She was so proud telling her children and bringing all her family to that new building, to Green Road Synagogue. Despite having only a fourth grade education, she was a Renaissance woman, spoke many languages, was an avid reader, and had so many points of interest. While she loved her community and she loved her friends, but most importantly, as you may have gotten the message already, she loved her family. She had an intense relationship with her siblings, but the relationship with her children, grandchildren, and thankfully great-grandchildren meant everything to her. She indeed made everyone feel that they were the most special one in the room. They were all at her bedside when she passed, and they were fighting, even then, who was her favorite. As was recounted, she made food with love and Wesson oil. And no one left her table without being full. Everyone got their favorite foods. Yes, even Jonathan's dog got his favorite food. And she would say, I made it just for you. And Julie said that when she was on a gluten-free diet, she figured out, quite a challenge for a European woman to cook gluten-free. She figured out that as well. It was interesting. Mike, you listed all the foods yesterday when we spoke. Kindle was the one that came up the most. And your mother and uncle talked about how their friends would come over and go to the freezer to find it, to get that Kindle. She was a deeply religious woman, but she respected everyone wherever they were on the religious path. In the early years, it was very hard when she first came. They had to make compromises working on Shabbat. Later in life, when she remarried, she became fully observant, and she asked, and I wanted to note how much she enjoyed her husband's children as well. She and her siblings were blessed with longevity. Her sister, who had been sickly in her youth, died at 88. The other ones lived into their 90s, and she passed away, as we all know, at 102. She said that the key to her longevity, a story that not everyone in the family knew, but she remembered as being a little girl growing up, there was a woman who was destitute and poor, and she would go and raise money to get challah for that woman, and she always claimed that was the secret to her longevity. She was incredibly vivacious until the very end. Even when she was suffering from dementia, her personality rang through. At her 100th birthday party, they started playing Hava Nagila. She threw away the walker and was dancing away. As a little girl, she was known as the most beautiful girl in Marmarash, and she remained beautiful both inside and out her entire life. When we mark the passing of a woman of this nature, it's a very poignant moment. She was great in her own right, and she represents a generation that we're rapidly losing. The life that she lived, the impact she made on the people around her, but most importantly, the impact that she made on her family, that's going to last forever. They'll last in her. She'll stay in your hearts. She'll stay in your actions. She'll stay in your deeds, and she'll be a lesson for all of us. Yehi Zechra Baruch. May her memory be for a blessing. Now we're going to ask everyone to please rise, and we'll say the Kel Malay. El Malay Rachamim Shokein Bamromim Hamsei Minukana Kana Kanfei Ashkina B'malot Kedoshim Utarim Kizora Kiyamazirim Es Nishmas Braina Bas Yisrael Shokoli Olama Bavur Shanak Mispalim Baraskars Nishmasa Began Eden Tehemenuchasa L'chein balarachamim, yasirei b'seitzer klafav liolamim, v'yitzro b'tzorah chayim es nishmasa, Adonai hu nachalasa, v'senu b'shlam mishkava, v'nomar amen. You may be seated. We've now concluded this part of the service. The interment will take place at Zion Memorial. The family will be sitting Shiva initially right after the burial. They're returning to 27500 Cedar Road, the community room, until 4 p.m. They'll be there Monday evening, 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. in the residence apartments of the Groner family, followed by Tuesday, 2 to 4 and 7 to 9, and then Wednesday once again at 2 to 4 and 7 to 9. And those who wish to contribute can do so to the Holocaust Support Service at JFSA. Thank you all for coming.
Interment will be at times in the Royal Park. We ask those who are going to that cemetery, please put on your headlights and your hazards. On behalf of the family, I thank you for attending.
I'm so good at this. I did it for a living. But thanks.
Yeah, sure. Thanks.
How many lifetimes have we had, Greg? You know? Really. And you and I have been connected through Tracy and Shannon, and then Linda, and then, you know.
Right. Linda, we didn't talk